All right. So again, we're just going to continue to kind of answer any questions. As you guys have questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. I'll be happy to kind of answer them and take them forward. Um, I think we've covered most of this unsecured loan question. Let's move on to Steve's question about we have six projects currently. How can I evaluate which project is good for me? I'll say that the first thing is definitely reaching out to our team on our calendar through our website. Um, it's kind of our job to be able to tell you, okay, these projects are better for these reasons. Some projects will basically have um, some project will have basically better priorities given for immigration reasons. Other projects will have better priorities given for financial reasons. Some projects will try to balance those two. Every project that we do, there's some kind of motivation behind it. And although we're generally trying to create, kind of um, the best overall mix for each project, right? It's kind of impossible to have just a project that's, fast for immigration, fast to get your money back, very, very safe, get you your green card very quickly. If it did, you know, every investor would be in that project. The reality is that every project has some pros and cons. Some projects, like rural projects, for example, will get you your green card faster. Then, some projects, like some of the high unemployment projects that we have, they might return money sooner. They might even offer a higher return. It really just depends on the different projects that are available at that time. I would first kind of understand what your priorities are. If you're Indian or Chinese, for example, most of those investors go towards rural projects because they're really just trying to make sure that they get their green card as quickly as possible. Rural projects have priority processing, they have larger set aside numbers, so there's more chances that you would get a green card more quickly. But we also get investors who are younger, who are, they have a use for this capital sooner rather than later. They want to be able to kind of get their money back sooner, and they're okay with waiting a little bit longer for their green card. They often choose our HUA projects or high unemployment area projects. So, Steve, you've got a good question here. I think that there's a lot more to it, right? But I would start by, kind of narrowing down the choices based on high unemployment versus rural. I would definitely ask about your risk tolerance. If you're willing to take on a little bit more risk to earn a higher reward, maybe an equity deal would make sense for you. Or if you're very risk averse, then a senior loan kind of debt fund makes a lot more sense. Um, and yeah, I think that a lot of it really is just talking to the regional center and having them give you some suggestions. So I would definitely recommend setting up some time with our team to chat about that, or any regional center for that matter. Um, That's right. Exactly. So like a senior loan would have less risk, right? So within loan structures, there's also different levels. So you might have a mezzanine loan, which is kind of at the secondary level that we were talking about in our earlier example, versus the senior loan, which is the first priority position. So, if you want to stay as risk averse as possible, it's not just, debt-based deals that you're looking at. You're specifically looking for a senior debt project. Okay, we're going to go back to Emma's question. Can a Chinese investor remit investment funds through a currency exchange company? Technically, yes, but the real question is, how is a currency exchange company remitting those funds on your behalf, right? Um, this is where a lot of problems have risen in the past, where basically, a currency exchange company was not licensed. They were basically just operating without any kind of approval from the government, and they ultimately were just using strangers to remit funds. Um, you typically want to talk to an immigration attorney that is familiar with Chinese rules and familiar with different Chinese exchange companies. And we're happy to recommend multiple different attorneys that have probably done that in the past. But yeah, one of the key components of currency exchange is making sure that any company that's involved as an intermediary is properly licensed. They sometimes might not be, fully licensed. They might be using a form of what we call hawala, which is like a parallel transfer where one person is giving money in one currency and another person is providing currency in a different currency, um, or money in a different currency. That might be okay. You just have to look at the source of that money, and ultimately, USCIS will determine whether or not it's legal. This is where an immigration attorney has to review it before they file it. And to your point, there are some situations that work, some situations that don't. Instead of hypotheticals, it's kind of better to come to the immigration attorney and be like, "Hey, I found this currency exchange company. Do you think this is one that would work?" And they can kind of tell you whether or not it would. And then there's got another question, which is how much time is needed to select projects, move funds, and then file the petition with USCIS? This is a great question, right? I think a lot of people kind of reverse the order of how they do things. A lot of investors, in my view, kind of say, okay, I'm going to collect all my funds first. I'm going to put them all into one account. I'm going to find a project that I like, and then I'm going to go out and hire an attorney. And because I've already done all the heavy lifting, I've already found, the money, I've already put it into one account, I've already found a project. It's only going to take maybe 1 week to file my case. Could not be less true, right? I would say that actually you should reverse that, and finding an attorney and hiring them should be your first step. And then they will guide you kind of on what um, steps you should take, where you can bring money from, how you can consolidate it, what the best way to do that is, what may or may not be allowed from a USCIS perspective, and they'll guide you in that whole process. And then they will also put together all the documentation for source of funds. Every attorney, every investor thinks that their source of funds is relatively straightforward. I will tell you that with, almost a decade and a half of doing this, that it's never as straightforward as it seems. Even the easiest sources of funds can take 3 to 4 weeks to document and put together for USCIS to review. And, most attorneys in this space that are experienced are not just working on one case. You have to give them some lead time to be able to work through your case effectively and make sure that you'll get an approval. So that process in and of itself, just hiring the attorney, working with them on the source and path of funds, I would say 4 to 6 weeks is pretty standard. During that same 4 to 6 weeks time, you can also be reviewing the different projects that are out there and seeing which one fits best for you. And then once, they've finished the documentation and you've chosen a project, it should only take at most a week to get everything kind of ready and filed. So, especially for us, like if you come to me and you say, Ahmed, I've chosen this project, yeah, I'll be able to kind of get you subscribed, receive your wire, and have you filed within just about 4 to 5 days at most. So, really, the thing that takes the most time is choosing an attorney, hiring that attorney, and ultimately working with them on the source of funds while also choosing your projects at the same time. That's a great question. What else, guys? This is a really great opportunity, I think, to ask just anything that's been on your mind about our company, EB5 about EB5 in general. Maybe you've got some source of funds questions like the ones that have been asked already. If you're new on the chat, feel free to turn off your mic, or sorry, unmute your mic and ask in the chat, or in the group, or you can also ask through the chat feature. Yeah, so Steve got a great question about choosing a lawyer. What's the best way to choose a lawyer? I think that there's a couple of different factors, right? I think that you'll find when you're looking at EB-5 lawyers, you're going to notice a lot of trends, a lot of 100% approval rates, kind of similar pricing. And most of that is true. I do think that a lot of the attorneys in the EB-5 space do a really good job and do have really good track records, bordering on 100% approval. I think that some of it is just comfort level, right? As you talk to different attorneys, who do you feel comfortable with? I think it's a really good idea to explore 2 to 3 attorneys minimum, and give them kind of a short summary of the five to of your sorry your source of funds, and then hear their different perspectives on whether or not your source of funds is going to work. And some attorneys might tell you exactly what you want to hear, um, and then other attorneys might be a little bit more conservative. And I think it's kind of up to you to see which one you feel more comfortable with, and taking it from there. The other thing that I would say is price definitely matters. If you're talking to 3 different attorneys and all 3 of them have 100% kind of repayment, or sorry, 100% approval rate, then what you might start looking at is, okay, what's the price difference between them, right? If 3 attorneys who have all been around for at least 10 years have all filed hundreds of cases and all have a 100% approval rate, or even a 98% approval rate, the difference in terms of your source of funds approval is negligible. At that point, what I would look more for is their availability. Will they answer your questions as quickly as you want them to? Speed, or if they're saying, hey, I can finish your case in 2 to 3 weeks, versus someone else is saying 5 to 6 weeks, you do want a little bit of speed. And then pricing, right? If one of them is significantly cheaper than the others, that might be the deciding factor. So you have to kind of weigh all these different factors together. Which one is your biggest priority? All those different things. Um, I think that's how you end up choosing an attorney that you ultimately want. You don't really need a lawyer to file the 526E. No, you definitely do. I think that a lot of EB or a lot of immigration categories, F1 students, they don't really need an immigration attorney necessarily to file their I-20s and EAD applications. A lot of times, if you're like like if you're sponsoring a family member with an I-130, you don't really need an attorney to file that. The 526E is definitely one of those forms where you need an attorney to look over everything, definitely from the source of funds perspective. It's just so nuanced. There's so many different rules and so many different things that you have to kind of worry about. I would definitely hire an attorney. I would not recommend filing an EB-5 application with no attorney involved. I've also got a question from an anonymous question, just asking about EB-5AN's track record on repayments. And I think this is something that a lot of our competitors try to use against us, and say that, oh, they haven't paid back a lot of people who have invested um, who have invested for a long time. And we try to be very transparent. We're not going to act like we've repaid a bunch of people that we haven't. And the reality is that although we're a big company now, a lot of that growth has happened in the last 3 to 4 years. The first 10 years of the company prior to the RIA, we did have a significant number of investors, but it wasn't like a huge kind of crazy, like 1,500 investors or anything like that. A lot of those investors were from China. And if you look at the visa bulletin for China, it's still stuck in 2016. We've only been around since 2013. So a lot of our early investors, especially from China, which was the majority of them, are stuck in backlogs. One of the old rules, and that's no longer the rule, but one of the really bad things about older EB-5 is that you had to keep your money invested until not only did you get your green card, but you held it for 2 years. And so a lot of our investors, especially the ones who are from China, even some who are from India from like the late 2010s, like even 2017, 2018 onwards, they've just become current. Some of them are still not even current. And so their green card was very, very delayed. And when your green card was delayed in the old days, it actually meant that your payback was also going to be delayed. And so we have a lot of investors who are in deals where their money, even if we got it back today, we wouldn't be able to repay them under the immigration rules. Um, a lot of regional centers out there will basically take that money back anyways and then redeploy it into a completely different project, often to make more money. What we did was we actually just extended the loans for the developers and the projects that those investors were already in. So they're not getting redeployed. They're staying in the same project that they originally chose. And we just feel like that's safer because it has the same collateral, the same protection that those investors invested into. Yeah, it does mean that unfortunately a lot of our investors still haven't been repaid, but it's not because the project has failed. It's not because we're holding on to the money or something and kind of, keeping it from them. It's largely due to the immigration reasons of old. All of our new projects, and for any investors who would now be kind of putting their money in, the rules are very different. The new rules are that as long as your money goes into a project and is held there for at least 2 years, you can now get the money back. And we have paid back investors, even when sometimes the immigration rules don't allow them to be. We've given them the option and said, hey, you're going to lose your permanent green card, but maybe you're just tired of this whole situation and you just want to get your money back. And some of them have said yes, and we've paid them back individually. So if you have any questions about repayments, I'm happy to share proof of repayments from past projects. I'm happy to share our track record. We've never had a failed project. So it is important to understand that, there are different reasons why people have not been receiving their paybacks yet. Um, Azamat has a good question about, from an Indian investor perspective, the difference between rural infra and HOA projects. Which one is maybe best if you're Indian. And honestly, it almost doesn't matter whether you're Indian or Chinese or any other nationality. The answer is probably about the same. Um, I think there's a lot of noise right now about infrastructure projects. I do think that, the first investors in to the infrastructure projects will have an advantage, because there's just so few of those projects, that they may get approved, and not have to worry about a backlog. The problem is there's so few infrastructure set aside visas. There's only 200 total per year. Okay. That's like 60 to 70 applications. There's way more infrastructure spots now out there. And so essentially, if once those get filled, that category will also be backlogged. The other thing about infrastructure is that it doesn't get priority processing. And so, yeah, it might be 2 years before you even get approved for an infrastructure application. By then, three times the number of people would already be approved in rural projects. So I don't think that there's necessarily one that's better, right? But if your primary kind of goal is to get a green card as fast as possible, I think it's really hard to argue at this point that rural is not the best choice, right? If we look at the stats over the last few years, all the way up until July of 2025, the numbers are kind of shocking. I think the numbers were something like 60% of all EB-5 applications that are rural have already been adjudicated, right? And like 97% of them have been approved, but only like 8% of all of the HUA applications that were filed have been looked at. And infrastructure is going to mirror HUA because it also doesn't have priority processing. So just from a pure like getting through that first hurdle of having a 526E approved and then getting your green card, like getting in line for your green card, rural is outpacing high unemployment by a significant margin. And that speed has become very relevant, right? Yes, it is probably likely at this point that rural is going to be backlogged earlier than HUA and infrastructure because more people are approved faster and more people are getting their green cards. But it's also probably true that a backlog in rural is going to be shorter than both high unemployment and infrastructure. One, because there's more of those green cards available in general, more than double, double whatever there is for HUA, and 10x what there is for infrastructure, right? Um, and also because of priority processing, you're just getting through this process faster. You're coming, in line. You're coming in line for a green card faster through the rural projects. Does that mean that no Indian should ever, consider an HUA project? or an infrastructure project? Not at all, right? There are advantages to those projects as well. You just have to be okay with a longer immigration timeline. I'll give you a good example. We have an HOA project that pays back in just 3 years with an equity option that pays 5% annually. So investors that come to us, even if they're Indian, and they say, "Hey, my priority is to get a green card, but I'm okay with waiting a 4 or 5 years, kind of worst case scenario for my green card. I really need this money back. My kid's going to college 3 years from now. I need to be able to kind of pay for that college tuition, and I need that money back as soon as possible." Great. We have an HUA project called Terracia that gives you your money back in about 3 years right now. Yes, you're going to give something up on the immigration timing, but you're getting something on the financial timing, and that's pretty important to some investors as well. Grandfathering. So Swami's got a good question about the grandfathering clause. And so basically what the grandfathering clause is that, back in the day, this program like was extended. Sometimes it may not be extended. And there was just a lot of uncertainty on the future of the program, right? Maybe the amount was going to go up. Maybe the way that they look at petitions is going to change. And investors who were applying at that time did not know that if those changes happened, how they would be affected. So the program just went away, even though you applied, 5 years ago, you might just get lost and, your application would not be processed in the future. The Reform and Integrity Act added what's called a grandfathering, what we call the grandfathering clause, and this fixed that. It basically meant that as long as you filed by a certain date, you were protected, you were definitely going to be adjudicated, and even if the program went away, worst case scenario, you would still receive your green card because you filed before that date. That date right now is September 30th, 2026. So it's almost like a hard deadline where if you file before then, you're going to be protected against future changes in the program. If you file after then new changes would definitely affect you. Swami, I wish I had crystal ball to tell you what the latest kind of what's going to happen in the future. What we think is going to happen most likely is that grandfathering is going to be extended until the end of the EB-5 program, which is actually set to end a year later, September 30th, 2027. The way that they would do that is by adding it to a continuing resolution or to a spending bill in Congress. It's pretty easily done. So I think the prevailing kind of mindset is that that will happen. So we do expect that to happen sometime by September of this year. And hopefully, fingers crossed, there's no lapse and people can enjoy that protection until September of 2027. We won't know it until it actually happens, but that's the prevailing idea of what should happen. No real updates to share as of right now in terms of progress on that front. Um, Steve had a great question. Okay, we talked about the priority processing for rural projects. Maybe there's some downsides as well, and there definitely are. In our view, when we put together rural projects, we're really focused on one thing, and that is safety of capital. Just because a project's in a rural area doesn't make it less safe. But we certainly are going to be working with, smaller developers, kind of out there developments, right? And so you really want to focus on safety of capital by, being senior in the capital stack, by having, protections in place and good collateral value for the money that you're lending to the developer. Um, I think that one of the downsides that we found is that, we're unable to find really short deals. Whereas on the HUA side, we can find a 3 to 4 year kind of deal and, realistically exit that deal in time to pay everyone their money back in 3 to 4 years. On the rural side, we really don't find deals shorter than 5 years. So typically our rural deals will be a little bit longer tie up for your investment. And remember earlier I mentioned that, usually the lower the risk you take, the lower the reward is, the lower your return is. That's definitely the case in rural projects as well. So if you're sitting in a senior priority position, a senior loan position, you're also going to make a low return on investment. So those are kind of the two downsides for rural projects, in my view, is that, because we want them to be safe and that's kind of our priority, you're sometimes looking at definitely a longer timeline for investment, and you're also looking at lower returns overall. All right, I've got two questions. I've got one from an anonymous source asking, or an anonymous person asking about, can you talk about timeline after filing to get the green card? And then after that, Azmat, I'll come back to your question. Um, so the question is, let's say you filed your application. Let's use a fake date just to make things easy. We'll just say you filed it January 1st, 2026. When can you expect your green card? I'm going to give this number to you without backlogs kind of playing a factor. Okay. What we've seen over the last 4 years is that rural applications will be approved in about we'll say 4 to 9 months. 9 months definitely being on the longer end, 4 to 6 months kind of being where a lot of people are falling into these days. At the same time, 4 to 6 months is what you can expect for an EAD and an advanced parole if you're filing from inside the US. Okay. So let's just imagine you filed your application on January 1st, 2026. Sometime around June, maybe, July, you should be getting your approval for your 526E. And you and your family should also have EADs and advanced paroles if you're applying from inside the US. Okay. Once you get the 526E approval, it takes another 6 to 10 months to receive the green card itself. Okay. So I like to tell investors, like, hey, if you're filing in January of 2026, when will you get the green card? Somewhere in the first half of 2027. So maybe, March through July of 2027 would be a good expectation to keep of getting your conditional green card. As soon as you have your conditional green card, if you have a backlog, whatever, um, everyone waits the same amount of time, which is 2 years, and then you file the A29 to get your permanent green card. That A29 application takes about another year to be approved. And while you're waiting for that to be approved, your conditional green card does get extended. Okay. So for a rural project from start to finish, this whole process takes right around 4 years, I would say 4.5 years. If it's a little bit longer, we'll say even five from the day that you file to the day you have a permanent green card, 10-year green card in your hand. To me, the big hurdle is getting that conditional green card. Very rarely do you see issues with the A29, especially in projects that are already under construction when you start your filing. For a high unemployment or an infrastructure project, you're going to be looking at about a year to a year and a half longer timeline for that 526E approval. So instead of 4 to 6 months for that approval, you typically are seeing anywhere from like 16 to 20 months for approval for an HUA or an infrastructure project. So now you're looking at, if you filed in January of 2026, you're not even going to have your 526E approved until mid 2027, maybe, even a little bit later. Um, and then 8 to 10 months from that, or 6 to 10 months from that, is when you'd get the conditional green card. So it's not crazy to imagine that first half of 2028 is when you'd be receiving your conditional green card in an HUA or infrastructure project. And that's kind of the difference between priority processing and then no priority processing. Okay. Asma, you got a great question. If the project duration says 5 plus 1, then it really actually means 7 to 8 years until the capital actually comes back. No, that's not the case. Now, there are different projects. So, like, I'll give you a good example. We've got a project called Twin Lakes. It's a 5 plus 1, right? So that's a 6 year loan term. But the developer doesn't take the money right away. It takes them about a year to a year and a half to take those funds. So, specifically in that project, yes, it could be about 7 to 7.5 years before you get your money back. However, then let's compare that to another one of our projects like Grand Park. That's a 4 plus 1 plus 1, 6 year maximum. And the developer has to take the money within the first 6 months of the funds becoming available. Okay. So in that project, it is exactly what it says, about 6 years to get your money back. And there's no kind of, additional time that you would be waiting. We try to be super upfront about these things, not necessarily on the website. I think a lot of that is just marketing stuff. But when you talk to someone on our team or you talk to me and you say, hey, I'm interested in this project, I usually give everyone kind of the worst case scenario, the longest that the project could take to repay you. You make your peace with that. And then obviously anything earlier than that would just be a bonus. But yeah, things to watch out for, definitely extensions. I'll give you another example. If you hear someone say, okay, this project is a 3 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, it's like really a 7 year loan term. Oh, but the project will be finished in just 2 years or 3 years, and they'll pay the money back then. That's not going to happen. If you're giving someone or a developer a 7 year loan term with extensions, even if they finish the project in 3 years, they will still keep the money and find another use for it for an additional 4 years. So it's really important to pay attention to um, definitely the repayment timelines that are put forth in the loan documents, but also, what the what's it called? Motivation is for the developer to repay you after that time. Okay. We've got just a few more minutes here, maybe one or two more questions. If anybody's got some more. Otherwise, we could always come back next week and do it again. And feel free to ask more questions then. I'll leave my email in the chat. If you have more questions or you just want to get in touch with me specifically, you can feel free to just email this email address. Let me know that you were on the call today. You had more questions that you wanted to have a chat about. Although my schedule does fill up, I'll always accommodate and try to get everyone. Earlier, Karthik, yes, what we can do. So we do typically post the office hours on our blog. We will kind of, you know, censor out everyone's names. So it'll just be basically a recording of my face, kind of talking about these different issues. Um, and I can actually send a copy, I'll send a link for the recording of this to everyone's email who attended today. So I'll be happy to do that. I have you guys just make sure that you registered under the right email, and I'll send a Dropbox link with the video so you can watch it back later. Okay. Thank you guys so much for attending. If anyone has any questions, like I said, just shoot me a quick email. If not, we do have these every week at this point, so feel free to join the next one. And I hope to hear from some of you guys soon. Have a great day.